Welcome to Cpp.chat, an undefined look at what's going on in the world of C++, chatting with guests from the community. But before we get to this week's episode, John has a disclaimer to read.
Thank you very much, Phil. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. These articles and recipes are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases. Please note, the material on this site is provided for your informational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any diet or exercise program. Copyright 2020, Cpp.chat, all rights reserved. So we have two guests on, and what they have in common is that they're both working on Copper Spice. Actually, they have a few things in common. We won't go into all those things. So Ansel and Barbara. Ansel Sermersheim, did I get that kind of right? And Barbara Geller. Much easier name to say.
Yes.
So Barbara and Ansel live near me, well, relatively near me. And so we work on the local user group stuff together. So I know them pretty well, but we are going to get to know them a little better on the show. Do we have any topics we want to talk about before we dive into talking about Copper Spice and things related to that?
Well, it hasn't been long since our last episode, so there's not much news.
That's right. That's right.
For regular listeners, yeah, it's been about 8 weeks for various reasons, including John going on a cruise for, is it 4 weeks or something?
So I have been home about 3 weeks since November. Wow. So the 1st of November, we went off. We've done Meeting C++. We've done several weeks of training, and we did 4 weeks of cruise. And we have been back in the Bay Area, like I said, total about 3 weeks. And then we got back Saturday. So I'm still completely scattered about anything and everything. And while we were on the cruise, I couldn't get any CPP-cast downloads. So I was really completely no C++ podcasts, and how people shouldn't have to live like that. That's
withdrawal symptoms.
That's right. There should be something in the Geneva Convention about that.
Absolutely.
Well, I had withdrawal symptoms from going on C++ podcasts, so I had to get my fix and go on CPP-cast a couple of weeks ago.
So tell us about this adventure.
So they had an idea that they wanted to do a show on conference organizing, and then they specifically made it. And they didn't ask John, because unfortunately you're overqualified. What they particularly wanted were people that were new to conference organizing, and in fact, they got 3 of us on who all had done exactly 1 conference, and we're preparing our second. So all of that initial panic. So that was you
with C++ on C.
Me with C++ on C. Then we had Adi Shavit of Core C++.
Core C++
and Fred Tingaud of CPPP in Paris.
Okay. All right.
Interestingly, my call for speakers has already finished. In fact, we should be announcing the speakers very soon. The other 2 are still running, so but we'll be closing soon. So if you're listening to the podcast version of this, it may already be too late. At least for Core C++, that closes on the 15th of Feb. CPPP, I think that's too many P's. Their CFPPP is running till the 29th of Feb, so you may still have a chance on that one, if not the first.
All right. So there is kind of almost 2 seasons of conferences, right? There's kind of the early ones, and then there's the fall ones. Yeah.
Yeah, although my one, C++ on C, is running a bit later this year in June.
Yeah, your call for speakers relative to the conferences. So are you going to be doing some extra training of speakers or some extra torture of them? You have to have some lined up so far in advance?
It's mostly because being in a seaside town, I think being in the summer, the hotels, if nothing else, get booked up.
Oh, I see.
So we wanted to make sure people could plan well in advance.
I see.
And even just us booking hotels and things for speakers. Okay. We may leave a little bit less time next year.
All right. So how did the show go? How was it to be the victim in? No, I didn't mean victim. No, I didn't mean that at all. Guest is what I meant to say.
Much easier. Surprisingly, I had more to say.
So it was a lot of fun. So I have started to catch up. I've listened to 2 of the episodes I missed, but I haven't gotten to, 1.5, I guess, and I haven't gotten to yours yet. So I'm anxious to listen to that.
Yes.
So the basic advice was don't start a conference.
I did say that, yes.
Yes, I had a
But
feeling.
you'll have to listen to the whole episode to find out the nuances to that. Yeah.
All right. Well, it seems like there's a lot of people in Europe who are not listening to that advice because there's lots of conferences going on in Europe. As someone who does a conference, actually a couple of conferences in the US, I'm glad there's not a lot going on here. I don't need that competition, right? Actually, I think it's great. I think it's wonderful that there's lots of stuff going on, and because there's lots of stuff to talk about. There's lots of people who want to talk. There's lots of people who are good at talking, and there's 5 million C++ programmers. So there's a lot of people who should be listening. So that's great.
Cool.
And you guys made a tour of Europe and talking adventures in Europe, right?
Yes, we did. We spent all of March and all of November in 2019 traveling all around Europe, doing lots of conferences. And we also took a lot of time to do local user groups, which was really exciting and quite fun.
Yeah.
So,
well, I try to encourage that as much as I can for speakers to do. I think it's doing local user groups is going to make you a better conference speaker. Doing local user groups helps the user group, helps the community. So
we have to send a shout out to the Amsterdam user group that's out there.
Yeah.
They hosted us twice last year, and I think we have an opportunity to go back next year. It is a fabulous group to speak for. So, and also the Munich group, that was quite exciting too.
I've done the Munich group twice, but I've never done Amsterdam. The Munich group is like, I think there were more people there than there are at C++ now. I mean, that tells you how big the group was.
That's nearly as many as at CPP.con.
Munich was the first.
Yeah,
the Munich group was the first place we actually felt like rock stars.
Yes,
it was a truly surreal experience for computer programmers.
Yeah. Absolutely. If you're wanting to do talks, don't ignore those opportunities at the local groups. They will make you a better speaker, and sometimes they are as satisfying as speaking at a conference. It's a lot of fun. So absolutely don't miss that.
And there's a new group that started up in Eindhoven. So that's also in the Holland area. So for anyone who does like speaking, they're looking for brand new speakers. So the group formed, I think, about a month ago.
And one thing I would say is that, well, at least in Europe, all these groups, the audience will understand English. You do not need to speak Dutch. You do not need to speak German.
Yes.
So, and in fact, I had an interesting conversation. I think the conversation I initially had was from someone from Russia, but I was talking to someone from Germany, and they kind of confirmed that they probably felt the same way, which was that given a choice between reading a C++ book in English or a C++ book in Russian, they would probably prefer to read the English version. And the reason is different translators might pick different terms to do the translating. There's no real standard for what a particular term means. So reading it in Russian may be confusing to you because you don't understand what they're talking about. Whereas if you read the English version, you know that you're getting what everybody in the community will understand. If you use this phrase, that's what we're talking about. But if you had a translated phrase, and I actually had a manuscript once that a publisher had given me, and the manuscript was written in German and translated into English. Ooh. And my response was, this isn't worth going forward. There were so many things that were hard to understand. It took me a long time. You'd think it would be easy to figure this out, but it took me a long time to figure out that every time they said array, they meant struct, and every time they said struct, they meant array. They were pretty consistent with that. So you'd think I would have figured that out pretty quick. But in fact, it took me a while to finally realize, oh, that's what's going on. But if it was just that, of course, I mean, you can do a copy and paste on that. But there was just lots of things
too much wrong.
That, and the irony of it is that the person who wrote it, the original author, speaks great English and is actually published in English. But they had written one particular book in German, and the publisher hired someone else to translate it. And it was really on the translator. The original, the book had the author written it in English to begin with, and great. But it was just, Anyway, my point is just that if you're in Europe, it does seem like people speak English to talk about C++.
Yes.
And it's not. Yeah, it was intimidating to me. First time I did training in Germany, that's what I was thinking about. So okay, I better hope they understand. And they did. Their English grammar was probably better than mine. So
we agree.
Yes.
Yes, that's terrific. So what else is going on? Speaking of CPP-cast, they had Sean Baxter on, and it's really important for us to point out that we had Sean Baxter on this show before they had Sean Baxter on that show. And the reason it's important to point that out is because that's almost never true for any guests.
That is true. We've done theirs before yours.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
And in fact, I'm pretty sure there are people who think the way we get guests is by watching that show and seeing what gets.
Yes.
That's not true. That's not true. We come up with those independently. We're just slower than they are.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, no, we had Sean first. And I haven't heard that interview yet either. So I'm looking forward to hearing that. So what else is going on? ACCU 2020 announced their schedule.
That's right. Yep.
Right.
So you can go and check that out.
Yes.
Lots of great talks as usual.
Yeah. ACCU is a great conference. What else is going on? C++ on C. Workshops have announced. Main talks announced.
No, not quite yet. So the workshops have been announced. The main talks are about to be announced. I'm just trying to finalize the schedule, which it's always that last bit that's the hardest, where you've got to make the final choices.
Right. Oh, trust me, I'm well aware.
Yeah.
So what are the workshops?
Workshops, I don't have that to hand, but off the top of my head, we have Klaus Siegelberger from the Munich user group. We have...
Sorry, I shouldn't ask you this, because the one you forget is the one you're going to be really embarrassed and say,
I might have to look this up, actually.
Are these 2 days or 1 day?
1 day.
1 day. Okay.
We have Nico Jacitas back.
Cool.
We have Rainer Grimm. And also Claire McRae, who we had on fairly recently. She's going to be doing a workshop with Llewellyn Falco, which is interesting because Llewellyn is the one who first invented approval testing, which is one of Claire's big things at the moment. So that's really going to be a workshop to watch, I think.
Cool. And still plenty of time because it's not until June, right? Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So if you could get your company to send you to that, then you could hang around an extra couple of days and enjoy the
3 days,
beautiful summer seaside on the English Channel, right? What else is going on?
I just wanted to briefly mention, won't take up too much time, that I did a blog post and a video recently for JetBrains on using C-Line with Docker, because I know that's something that a lot of people are interested in. Particularly useful for working with multiple tool chains, or just getting a reliable, reproducible tool chain on many people's desktops by running it in Docker, running the tool chain in Docker, but C-Line outside. So knocked up a video or a blog post, whichever way you prefer to consume it. But also, as part of that, we're using the remote development workflow for that. We have a number of ways to do remote development, and I'm sort of collecting use cases now for additional remote development workflows that we can perhaps work on or see if we can make a bit better. So
if someone's doing something interesting, they could send you an email. And
yes, or if they'd like to do something interesting.
Okay, all right. So the idea is that I only need to have the kind of machine that I want to work with, and then I use Docker if I want to write portable code. I can use Docker and if I want to work on a Windows machine, then I could use Docker to have a Linux machine or something like that, right? That's the idea.
You should mention.
Yes, although you can do that with WSL as well.
Okay, I don't know what WSL is, so.
We did switch all of our CI to use Docker.
Right.
Oh, yeah?
It's fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Docker's something I've been getting into a lot recently. It's really changes the way you think about these things.
It was extremely cumbersome to maintain that many VMs on our CI build. So switching everything over to Docker, what makes it really advantageous is if you want to try something off the wall, you can just start another Docker instance and then make those changes. And if it doesn't work, you just trash the Docker and start over again without having to reconfigure the VM.
Mm-hmm.
So
We could do a whole show on
yes,
Docker, but
you can talk
this
more
show.
about that.
Sounds like that may be in the making here.
Maybe.
Okay, so
Yes.
you said you've got you did both a blog and a video about this.
Yes, well, I did the video, and then I was asked to do a little blog to sort of introduce it, and I ended up basically rewriting the contents of the video in the blog, because I know some people prefer to read, some people prefer to watch a video, so
That's right. Yeah,
you can choose your own adventure.
All right, so you'll put a link to those in our show notes then.
I shall, yes.
Okay, all right, that sounds great. What else is going on? Oh, the Meeting C++ survey. Jens has a survey out, and I think he's just inviting anybody and everyone who's a C++ programmer to please take a few minutes and answer some of the questions.
That's right, yeah, and because it's so quick fire to get through them, he's building up a lot of really interesting data sets already.
Yeah. Right. The problem is, of course, you don't know exactly. It's not a truly random sample. It's people who have responded. So there's going to be people who are a little bit more attuned to what's going on because they've seen that. There are fewer dark matter programmers. But if you want your opinion heard, please take the survey because it's not going to be ignored. There's a lot of people who are going to be interested in the results. There's a lot of different kinds of questions too. It's a lot of different things. It didn't take me very long, and I thought it was kind of fun and interesting to do.
I was particularly interested to note that in that survey, when asked about unit testing frameworks, Catch is only just trailing Google Test, the number 2 test framework for C++.
Yeah. Very good. All right. So let's talk about CopperSpice.
Okay. Yes.
CopperSpice is filling in the pattern that Barbara and Ansel have established, that if they don't like something, they start all over from ground zero with it. So I'm surprised they aren't running their own Facebook program because, there are problems with Facebook, right? So CopperSpice came really, though, from your desire to be able to write. I think Barbara was really the one who wanted to write cross-platform GUI in C++.
Yes. I was definitely, yes.
And you were looking at options for that. So tell us the story.
I had been a GUI developer, and originally my work was only on Windows. And I realized that was very limiting, and it was not in C++. So I wanted to make the jump. And the problem is I couldn't really find a GUI set of libraries that would work with C++. And Ansel was watching me struggle quite a bit, not with just C++. It was with the idea of, why don't we have these tools available?
Yeah.
And so I think you tried to strangle yourself a couple times.
It was really painful to watch. There were a lot of toolkits out there at the time. They all had glaring issues. None of them were really good modern C++. Some of them worked better than others, but they were all just frustrating to use from the standpoint of somebody who I had never worked on a GUI application in any serious way. All my stuff had been daemons. So I was used to, just using the standard library and POSIX, and that was it. And it was just astonishing how much baggage came along with most of these systems.
Most of the GUI libraries that are out there, the problem has to do with they don't conform to just C++. You kind of have to go around the barn sideways. So we started CopperSpice. It's progressing, and the idea is to make it that actually will leverage the standard library, make it be a library that a standard C++ programmer would understand right away. That the nomenclature and how you instantiate objects or use templates fits into the C++ paradigm.
Right. Because I think a lot of GUI stuff is still locked in kind of the 90s and not modern stuff at all.
Yeah.
This is where I grew up. So this is my area. I do, the exact opposite of Ansel. All of my work was GUI stuff, most of it Mac. And in the 90s, this is what people were talking about. Is there a way to make this cross-platform? And the attempts to do so were always kind of a, least common denominator kind of thing. Nothing was ever really successful. And, but But that's what we're trying to get to with CopperSpice. Are you using on a particular platform? Are you using the native OS drawing elements?
There's a lot of complexity around that. It depends on the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Certain platforms provide more ability to use their native UI paint system than others. For example, on Linux, there is no native UI. There's just X11 or Wayland, so there's nothing to fall back on there. OS 10 actually has a really rich set of features for drawing native widgets with a custom UI, and so we make use of that. In Windows, it's sort of a mix of both.
I see.
But part of the difficulty is that not all widgets exist natively on all platforms. And you particularly notice this when you look at Windows versus Mac. The common subset of widgets is actually pretty poor. And so a lot of widgets have to be drawn and look native, but they actually don't exist as a native control. So there's a lot of work in there to get that to feel reasonably native.
Okay. And what platforms do you support?
Well, we are on Linux, Windows, and Mac. In our CI, we have 16 different platforms and variations. Everything from Ubuntu to Debian to Arch, Gentoo. We're on 2 different versions of Mac. On Mac, we are driven more by Xcode and what it supports. We just had to drop one version and upgrade just so that we could be on newer versions of Apple Clang. Windows, it's a little bit easier being with Windows 10, but we actually still build binaries for Windows 7 just so that we can support a 32-bit environment. CI, we actually have 2 CI machines right now because building takes a while on a lot of different platforms.
So, but it doesn't sound like there's much mobile support. It's desktop stuff.
Right now, it is on desktop. We are in the process. We have somebody on the CopperSpice team who is looking at what it's going to take. We want to make some interesting choices on mobile. And there are some, I think Android is going to be our main focus on mobile. It's not actually as complicated as it sounds. It is just about adjusting how you start up an application. Is really where the issues are.
I see.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that, and I said, this is my background trying to do this stuff and seeing people, again, many years ago, trying to write code that would, just seamlessly work on the Mac and Windows, which at that time, that's pretty much what we were looking at. Linux at that time was almost never somebody's desktop, is almost always a server kind of solution, or Unix in general, I should say.
Yes.
But one of the kind of conclusions that I came to was that the way to make a cross-platform app is to make as much business logic as possible that has nothing to do with the user interface at all, and really build a custom user interface on each platform. Because I never saw anyone who was really successful at it. And the problem is not just, you can make a window that works exactly the same way on both platforms. You can do that. But the problem is the user's expectations are that Windows aren't exactly the same behavior on both platforms, because people from a Windows world want it to work Windows-ish, and people in the Mac world, of course, are religious bigots about how it works on the Mac. And so that's why I kind of figured, the way to do this is to essentially give up. And by that, what I mean is make the application logic as portable as possible, but consider the UI essentially a driver, which is going to be custom written by someone who's an expert on whatever that platform is. But you don't need to do that. Your code doesn't need that.
Your philosophy on a thin application is exactly what we used to do years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I do understand of keeping the business logic and the GUI separate. With CopperSpice, no, you don't need to do that. If you want to see a demo of how CopperSpice works, our kitchen sink application, which binaries are available from our website, it is the same application, whether we compile it for Mac or or Arch or Debian or Windows. It's the exact same source code. There are a few places where you might want to do something specific, and you can, but the GUI itself, it is the same. You write it and then you compile it on that platform and it works.
I mean, one example I have
along a related direction, though. One of our goals for Copperspice is to make it more of a federation of libraries rather than a framework. And the reason that's important, it touches on what you said. For example, Copperspice is the whole set of code, but there are also separate libraries like CS Signal. If all you need is the signal slot delivery mechanism, that's a separate standalone library. So you could have some of your backend code that only needs to be able to emit signals, and it just links with CS Signal. And then you put a Copperspice GUI on top of that, and it interoperates seamlessly because under the hood, they're using the same mechanism. So the idea is sort of to make it more of an a la carte model, where you pick the particular libraries that have the functionality you need for that component. And then when you put all your components together, they come together in a unified system.
Well, one of the things that I kind of experienced, I mean, maybe you can figure it out logically thinking about it, but in practice it also followed through, was that when you tried to do what you call the thin client model, you know, try to make the business logic as portable as possible and then put the UI on top of that. One of the nice things about that is that you ended up with a better architected end product because you had a really... Yes, more testable, but you had a really clear definition of this is GUI, this is business logic. Because in practice, when I worked on apps that weren't that way, you know, it was going to be a Mac app, and you know, we would essentially try to do that. You know, oh, here's GUI and here's, but things would leak, abstractions would leak in, and you end up designing your business model around the fact that, well, here's the data structure that you're going to want to display this with, and things like that. So whereas you know, I did a project where the backend was done in one language and the GUI, this was on the Mac. And so the backend was done completely in C++ and the GUI was done in Cocoa. And the fact that they were different languages, and in fact, although we had a single team working on it, there were people who were more Cocoa-ish and more C++-ish, so they tended to be. But this division made for a better architected app, actually, because we did a better job of abstracting the business logic and the GUI. And that, in my previous experience, those things where you try to do it, but then over time it would kind of leak a lot of abstractions both directions.
That also becomes the problem. So now you need a team that understands what works on Mac, what works on Windows, what works on Debian. So you sort of tie yourself into, I need the C++ team and all these different GUI people. The idea that Ansel was touching on is that Copperspice is not a framework, but a set of libraries, so that you really can focus on writing the code in C++, develop the GUI, and you don't have to spend your time, and you don't need a team that then understands how to make those specific tweaks for a specific platform. It is an approach that we're really targeting Copperspice for the C++ community. And so that all you need to do is learn C++ and use Copperspice as a library, not as a framework, because it is a complete paradigm shift in terms of where some GUI libraries go. Because most systems, they want to be a framework. And we've had people ask us the difference between a framework and a library. And it is terminology it's a little touchy, but the framework idea is that it's driving the application. With a library, the developer is driving, and you're just asking the library, hey, do this for me. So it's a completely different approach.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that.
Yeah.
And in fact, that allows for more flexibility.
Yes.
In the overall design, because otherwise you're kind of locked into the things that the framework, you know, you can do anything that the framework maker originally envisioned you being able to do. And if you ever want to do something outside of that, you're fighting the framework because it just didn't support that properly. So let's talk about some other stuff. Although you did say something that I wanted to follow up on. You said something about the Copperspice team.
Yes.
Is Copper Spice some big corporation with thousands of engineers working for it? Because
Well,
I kind of get that impression sometimes.
I don't know if it's thousands of
I
people,
see.
but when we were in Berlin at Meeting C++, we were having a chat with somebody, and she mentioned their team has like 6 people. And I said, well, our team is kind of getting a little bigger. And she was startled, and she goes, I thought it was the 2 of you. And I'm like, no, we have about 10 to 12 people right now. Maybe that's not huge. We do get approached. We had somebody at CPPCon run up to us and said, can I join? And it's like, of course you can join the team. Any developer who wants experience with an open source project, has a little spare time, wants to make some changes, we're happy to work with beginners, advanced people, any level. But yeah, we are a team.
And that's part of the reason why you were making the trip to Europe, or the trips to
Yes.
Europe, right? Was to meet people on the team. And
Yes.
because I think a lot of your team is European, right?
We do have an amazing amount of people in Germany and Holland. And we're also, it's just, it is amazing the number of people that have come up to us recently and said, you know, I'm going to submit a pull request. I have this one little thing. And the truth is, it doesn't matter if it's one pull request or it's an entire library you want to add to Copper Spice. It's all good. Okay. We actually have relinquished moderator rights, or whatever it actually is termed as. We don't actually control every single library with Copper Spice, and we let other people take over.
So can you give us some examples of libraries that other people have done that are?
The crypto.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that we have is we have a contributor who's taken over maintainership of the networking library that's part of Copper Spice. It's in need of some modernization. And as part of that process, he's developing what's going to be a standalone library, which is a cross-platform modern C++ crypto API wrapper around various platform-specific other libraries. Like there's so many. You've got the Secure Transport on Mac, you've got OpenSSL, so many different versions. And many of them have complicated APIs, and not all of them are very natural. So we need
and if you don't get that right, you really pay. I mean, this isn't a place where you want to make these kinds of mistakes.
The nice thing is the crypto library will be a standalone BSD library that anyone can use. And Copper Spice will use the crypto library in the networking library. So we're creating a wealth of information and an advantage for somebody who just wants the crypto library. But then somebody who's using the network library in Copper Spice, they get the benefit of everything.
And as you touched on, I mean, crypto is an area where APIs really matter. If you look at a lot of the security holes that have happened, they're not problems with the underlying crypto library. They're problems in the way a developer has used the library. And so if we can make a more type safe and resource allocation safe interface around crypto, I think we can improve the security profile of the typical application that just needs to open an HTTPS connection.
Okay, that's cool. That's great.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other things that we want to talk about outside of Copper Spice? You guys also work on Doxy Press, and the story here is that you wanted to document. It's the same story, right? You wanted to do something, and the tools you found didn't meet your standards.
I spent early on, it's like, okay, we need to start documenting. There's a couple of good documenting programs, and I attempted to run them. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, I just kind of gave up in terms of they would not document the templates, the actual code we had in Copper Spice. It didn't work. We tried a couple of avenues to improve the product. That didn't work. We realized it needed a major overhaul. So we kind of put Copper Spice down a little bit for about a year and developed Doxy Press. We then had to go back and forth between the two because Doxy Press does use Copper Spice for its GUI if you're using the Doxy Press app. but all of the containers and everything that we use in the Doxy Press program, those are also part of the core library with Copper Spice. And
so what are you talking about, the Doxy Press app? You can use it without that?
Yeah, you can. The Doxy Press app is just sort of a wizard interface. All it does is give you a nice UI for generating a config file and running Doxy Press. Doxy Press itself is a command line program that just consumes a config file and looks at your source code and generates output.
I see.
But there's a little over 300 settings you can use with Doxy Press. You need about 10 to configure the program. But if you really want to adjust all of it, again, it's a JSON file, so you can do it by hand. As a GUI person, I like using Doxy Press app to configure the project, because then I can use drop downs and all the standard GUI controls that I'm used to.
So what kind of output do we get here? I mean, first of all, in the format, I mean, what are the data file formats? And then we can talk about what kind of output it looks like. But
sure.
So we have a bunch of output formats. There's HTML, comes in several different flavors. You can generate CHM help. You can generate various help that can be consumed by different IDEs. There's also LaTeX output. There's PDF done through that. There's also XML. There's
RTF,
RTF, yes.
RTF, man pages. There's several different outputs. So you can select whatever output format you want. But I will mention that Doxy Press doesn't just deal with C++. It can document C, it can document Fortran. There's quite a few languages that you can use as an input. But the majority
wait.
I'm sorry?
There are languages other than C++?
I know. I'm sorry to have to break this to you. We can, yeah. And well, actually, it's nice that we can handle Objective-C, C, and C++.
Yeah.
So we take all of that into consideration. Our main focus is maintaining the C++ side. As C++ gets a little bit more complicated with C++ 20 and beyond, documenting is going to be more complicated. It is not just a matter of a simple little parsing and presto, you're done. There's some stuff you have to do to be able to parse the files and the comments and pull everything together. And with C++ 20, we're going to, and modules and things like that, we're going to see documenting programs need to be improved a bit. And
okay. Well, we're adding things like contracts, but we're also adding things like concepts, which is a whole new thing of, you know, documenting concepts and what's dependent on those and those kinds of things. So what exactly am I getting when you say document this program? What does that mean exactly? What does the documentation look like?
Well, it's documentation that'll probably be familiar to anyone who's ever looked at API docs for anything online. It looks pretty similar to what you expect. If you just turn on a couple of options, even without putting any comments in your code whatsoever, it can extract the entire public API, generate API documentation, and you can also check one box that will turn on the source browser, so you can cross-reference from that documentation into the source files where all the items are declared, walk through the source code, click on some function call, it'll take you to the documentation for that. So even without actually doing any work documenting, within a few minutes, you can have at least a skeleton API documentation set.
This is really a good thing. We've had people come to us saying, I just inherited a new project and there's nothing. I have no idea what I'm looking at. And so we said, well, just run Doxy Press on it. And he did. And he's like, now I have a tree structure. Now I can see. He was aware that there wasn't docs inside. There were no comments added, but he could see the flow of the program.
All right. So when you're talking about comments added, you're talking about of a specific format, so the Doxy Press will understand, oh, this is a comment that I need to document in a certain way or something.
Yes.
How does that look like, and what's the effort involved, and what kinds of things am I going to be doing if I wanted to do a good job on my software?
There is a plethora of commands you can use, and the amount of effort you put into the documentation, you can embed it in your code which is not actually what I prefer. I like the documentation in a separate text file. That keeps the source code nice and clean. And then there are ways of referencing everything. So saying that I'm documenting this class or this method, and then it all gets pulled together. For CopperSpice, we do that with the API. We have a separate set of text files that then reads the header files, and it links the comments all together based on the syntax you've used. But we also have another document with CopperSpice. It's our overview documentation. That has nothing to do with source code. That is just writing text files that actually give the user information. So if somebody is starting out with CopperSpice or just wants to know more about it, they can look at our overview docs, and there's tables in there that says like what platforms we're on, or how you would compile, or where you would download things. So we're leveraging Doxy Press in two entirely different ways. And the overview docs become very readable and maintainable by using the Doxy Press formats.
Isn't there an issue with keeping things in sync? I mean, it seems like I make a change to my API and I forget about the documentation. I can't imagine a software engineer forgetting about documentation, because every software engineer I ever met always makes sure the documentation is complete and correct before writing any code. But I'm just saying, in a hypothetical situation, might it not be difficult to keep these things in sync?
There are actually some settings you can turn on, which we've actually used on CopperSpice when accidentally that happened to us.
Hard to believe.
It is stunning, but we changed part of an API so fast we didn't keep the docs up. So we turned on some settings, and by looking at the output, it would tell us where the documentation was out of sync. Like we had changed parameters. We were no longer passing something that was const. Now we were passing an R value reference. So you can look at that output and you can see the differences. And then you can sit there and you can decide, where the problem is. I would say 99% of the time it's the documentation, but we actually found a few places that we messed up something in the API itself. So it's really just an output that says, these don't agree anymore. What do you want to do? So obviously you turn those off when you're actually releasing the documentation, because it does make the documentation a little bit larger and cumbersome. So it's really just for evaluation.
So even for the documentation, we have both a developer build and a release build.
Well, I would say there's some test settings. You can leave them on. It's not inappropriate comments. It's just it adds a lot of extra stuff.
Yeah. And actually, if you need a developer in a release build, there's actually a tool where you can mark certain methods as internal.
Yeah.
So you can generate a public API with those methods removed, and then you can generate your own internal documentation that includes their information.
Okay.
There's a lot of tools there.
Yes.
So are we going to be able to throw away Boost Book and just replace the documentation with Doxy Press?
It is our hope that somebody on the Boost team, we've worked with a few people who have looked at this, and they are looking into it. I think it would be a good move.
Okay.
So,
I'm cautiously optimistic.
All right.
Well, so speaking of Boost libraries, let's talk about libguarded.
Well, the first thing to mention about libguarded is we actually changed the name ever so slightly from libguarded to CS libguarded, because we already had CS signal, CS paint, and CS string. So we decided libguarded needed to sort of match the names. So other than a name change, that was the biggest thing about it.
Okay, so explain what the heck this is.
Yes.
Sure. So CS libguarded grew out of some work that we were doing on CopperSpice, as most of our projects do. We were working with some multi-threaded code in the kernel of CopperSpice. And we were having some discussions and some design reviews. And Barbara was coming from a viewpoint, she had done more database-oriented work, where you lock a record. You lock a table. You always lock a thing. And I was coming from a C++ point of view, where you lock a mutex, which has no real meaning. It's just a thing that you lock.
Right. This is one of the things that's always made me feel a little uncomfortable, is that when we lock a mutex, that is entirely a convention. A mutex is a mutex of this vector or of this thing, and there's no mechanical way of knowing what the mutex is supposed to protect. We just know somehow, maybe it's documented, maybe whatever, that you don't make a change to this without owning the mutex. There's actually none enforceable in code, and in fact, it's not even detectable except at code review, a human looking at this and saying, wait a minute, this is supposed to be protected by this mutex. There's no actual relation in any way.
That was sort of our discussion. It was a little louder in the office, I will say, as I was like, what are you locking? And it really sounded like a conversation on who's on first, and it's like, what are you locking? The mutex. What does it protect? Where's the data? And then a light bulb went on over Ansel's head, at which he said, oh my God.
And I said, wait, we're C++ programmers. We know how to build abstractions. Why not build an abstraction for this? So libguarded grew out of the idea of, why don't we just encapsulate data with a mutex that protects that data, and provide.
So instead of having a vector and a mutex, we now have a single structure that has the vector and the mutex both in it, and you can't get to the vector until you lock the mutex.
Yes, exactly. And so that's the very simplest class. That would be a guarded vector.
And now, how does that work then? I mean, what is it? Because if I lock it and I somehow returns a reference to the vector or something like that.
Yeah. So.
But if I unlock it, I still have the reference. I mean, you can't take it away from me.
You don't.
No, you don't.
No, you don't. So when you lock a guarded variable, what you get back is a handle. The way you unlock it is by releasing the handle.
I see.
So the handle acts like a smart pointer. And when you let go of it, then the resource is released. So you can't get it wrong, and unless you take the address of the object that it points to. But you can always shoot yourself in the foot if you try hard enough. The really neat thing about this is that this idea generalizes to a whole taxonomy of ways of working with shared data in a multi-threaded program, even to some mechanisms that are lock-free, which is pretty neat. You can do certain lock-free constructs without really having to do a whole lot of proofs on a blackboard that you got it right.
What was very interesting about CS libguarded was the library was developed. We needed it because we had a race condition in some stuff we were doing in signals and slots at a very deep level. And we went to put it in, and it didn't work because we kind of forgot one piece, which then Ansel went and added.
Because it turns out it's really, really easy in multi-threaded programming to very effectively turn a race condition into a deadlock.
Yes.
That's always a very simple transformation to do, but actually making it correct is a completely different thing.
Yes.
So that's why libguarded also has a set of RCU classes. And the RCU classes stands for read, copy, update. It's a way of dealing with containers of data in a multi-threaded program. And real briefly, the property that the libguarded RCU list has is if you're iterating over one of those containers, absolutely nothing that any other thread does will invalidate that iterator, up to and including destroying the container you're currently walking. And that was the property we needed in order to make CopperSpice work. So you can be walking a container that is in the process of being destroyed by another thread, and everything is consistent.
Because the destruction doesn't happen until you're actually finished with your... As long as you have it locked, it exists, is what you're saying.
As long as the particular piece of data and everyone after it in the container is needed, then that segment of the container isn't destroyed.
So this allowed us to get rid of the race condition and the deadlock that we had created in handling signals and slots. So our signal slot library uses libguarded, and all of this is used in CopperSpice. So anybody that's doing multi-threading should be using CS libguarded, because it is a way to ensure that your threading is done correctly. Even if you're not using CopperSpice, CS libguarded is a library that should be used.
So when you submit this to Boost, is it going to be Boost libguarded or Boost CS libguarded? Is this?
We'll have to talk to the person who is doing that submission on how they want to name it, whoever he may be. So,
all right.
Yes.
But it is a standalone. It is a standalone.
Yes.
Yep. Completely standalone.
And I will mention that all of our libraries, and in fact, CopperSpice, everything was migrated to C++ 17 as of about 6 months ago. So we made that move. So all of our third-party libraries, all of the standalone BSD, all of CopperSpice, everything is tested and running with 17.
Meaning it's working with 17, or meaning it requires 17?
It requires 17. We made that choice. Several years ago, we had to make the choice to move to 14 because of some type trait problems. The team as a whole decided it was time to move to 17. There were things we needed, and there were some classes we wanted to rewrite, which we're doing now, and it required 17. We also, at the hard request of the team, we finally last year dropped our AutoTools build system. We had been maintaining both an AutoTools and a CMake, and this was causing a little bit of frustration doing two build systems. So we let the AutoTools go because that's what the team wanted, and it was the right choice. And since then, we've had several CMake people help us improve our CMake files. And actually, we had a chat with somebody just the other day. CopperSpice has around 150 CMake files, and which is quite a lot. But we had part of the team doing the code review, and somebody decided to count. So it's around. It actually, somebody said, "Why do you have that many?" And the truth is, on a project like this, because there's 11 different libraries with CopperSpice, putting
that are standalone.
There's four standalone, and then in CopperSpice itself, there's 11 different libraries. And so it turns out you really don't want some of your CMake files incorporating. Each one shouldn't incorporate everything. Mm-hmm. So breaking it apart into smaller libraries made a lot of sense, especially because, like our maintainer of the network library, he wants to be able to change those CMake files on his own and not need to run it through anyone else. So all the files went through a major rewrite in the past 6 months, and about 4 people did the code review. And it is amazing how many different ways we had of spelling things. It's now consistent. So it is consistent across the board now.
All right.
So,
yes. So we don't want to have video stars on without talking about their video channel. So you have a YouTube channel that's just called CopperSpice.
Yes.
Yes.
And CopperSpice came because that's your middle name. Where does CopperSpice come from?
Well, CopperSpice came out of the idea that we love to cook, and Ansel had a requirement that a library should be 2 different words put together that are spelled exactly as they sound and that no one else is using. And actually, we went through every utensil and device in the kitchen. I mean, there was a lot of permutations of pots and pans and things.
Pepper spatula.
And nothing worked. And
then we brought in the periodic table.
We did. We brought in the periodic table, and I realized that cinnamon wasn't gonna happen because I can't spell cinnamon. And
on aluminum.
So that
doesn't work, and it's too long anyway.
Boreum didn't make. Or I don't even know if I'm pronouncing boreum right. But yes, when we were like, okay, pan copper, and all of a sudden it was CopperSpice, and literally it was 2 a.m. And
but the point is, this is very Googleable, right?
Yes, it is very Googleable.
2 words that you know how to spell. You put them together without a space, and it's the only thing in the entire universe that's called CopperSpice is your library.
Actually, CopperSpice does have one other hit. It's an eyeshadow. It's an eyeshadow color.
But we find our users usually don't get too confused.
Yeah, usually
they can figure it out.
Between programming, and if you put CopperSpice C++, we're the first.
But that is the appropriate eyeshadow to attract C++ programmers.
I do think we will have to be distributing Copper Spice eyeshadow now after this
Yeah,
podcast.
that would be a great that'd be a great conference giveaway or something.
That's going to be the new giveaway.
So you can go on YouTube and you can look up Copper Spice and you're going to find your channel. And what did you say? You have 40 videos?
There's about 45, 46.
46, 47.
We do one once a month, and
so they're moderately short. They're not like a full session. Easy to consume over lunchtime and still get your lunch in. Under 20 minutes for the most part.
Yeah, right? Many of them were about 12 to 18. We've been trying to make them about 10, but we tend to find too much to say sometimes.
I can't understand that.
I know you wouldn't. Yeah. You start to talk and you're going, oh, I want to say this. Right. What's nice is the videos, some are about Copper Spice, some are about C++. We have one about copyright. We did one about the C++ ISO standard. So because we were getting confused on how is the ratification, how is all that done? And we talked with a couple people, did some research. So if somebody's going, well, how does this process work? And what are the different subgroups? We did a pretty good job, I think, of documenting,
All right. So the topics aren't specific to your code, but they may be about your libraries. In other words, you're kind of just generally of things that are going to be interesting to C++ programmers, which is, of course, our audience here.
And often the topic will just be, oh, here's a snippet of code that we were working on as part of working on Copper Spice, but let's talk about it in a C++ context. What are the tools we're using here and how do they work?
What are the pitfalls? What are the advantages? What's the insight? Okay. And it looks like you have made a change here kind of recently, which is to set up all these different playlists, right?
Yes, we reorganized the playlists so that it would be easy for people to find. We did a 3-part video very early on, which gets the most hits. There's 3 different videos that cover data types, semantics, all the initial stuff that somebody moving to 11, 14, or 17 would want to see, or somebody just coming back to the language. We've had a lot of people that said, I could not figure out move semantics. And so there's 3 videos there on the beginning of the playlist of C++. They're some of the most popular in terms of.
So it looks like here's the playlist.
Yeah.
There's one that is Copper Spice. Obviously, these are going to be talks specifically about that library. And then C++, and that's what you're talking about. Modern C++ from the beginning to the middle.
Yes.
And a series on that. And then other things that are specifically about C++. And then there's a C++ 17. And then there's one on graphics. So you guys get to talk specifically on graphics, including text rendering and things like that.
Yes, we did several videos on that. That was in combination with our newest library, which is CS Paint. CS Paint is a wrapper for the Vulkan API.
I see.
Because nobody can use it.
And then there is the multi-threading, which I assume you're going to talk about things related to LibGuard, if not necessarily specifically about LibGuard, but those kinds of things. And then there's a Doxy Press for people who are wanting to use Doxy Press, I assume.
It is an intro to Doxy Press, yes.
I see. Okay. All right. So how is the channel overall going? Is this getting you the kind of response you were looking for, or what kind of response are you getting from being video stars now?
I think one of the neatest was somebody making a comment saying, English is not my first language, and I could almost understand what you said, which is really good. And I thought it was a fabulous comment because he's a C++ programmer. And yeah, if you're struggling with, whatever language you're speaking, if you can actually watch a video and make sense of it and learn something, that seems like we accomplished what we wanted.
Yeah. We also really thrive on feedback of all kinds, and we love some of the YouTube comments that we get. I know some broadcast.
Yes, we do like the comments.
This may be the only time in the history of the universe where people say, "I love my YouTube comments."
We do.
We got a comment from a viewer which was I consider one of the high points of our career was when somebody said, I didn't understand this topic. I still don't understand it, but now I know enough to Google for what I need.
Yeah.
I thought that's great. That's you're started now. You can find where you're going now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Speaking of where we're going now, we're going away because we've run out of time here. Did you have anything? I've been dominating everything again, Phil. Did you have anything you wanted to?
I think the moments have passed. Actually, there was one thing I did want to say. So as well as all these videos on YouTube, there's a number of videos of talks that you've done at conferences. Some of them have been very popular as well.
Mm-hmm.
The first one that I saw was on LibGuardian, actually.
Yes.
Saw you up in Aspen, C++ now a few years ago. But more recently, you've been getting a lot of success with your undefined behavior talk.
Yes.
Obviously, we don't have time to dig into that subject now, but you've got like a couple of sentences to say about your position on undefined behavior before we wrap up.
It's what's amazing to us is that talk is actually on the SG20 list. That was quite stunning to us and exciting. We've given this talk several times. I think we actually might know the material now, having done it 6 or 7 times. We did a live version at Code Dive, so that was really good. It is one of the first talks we did at CPPCon that was absolutely just C++. And I think it's what showed people that we're not just library people. We're actually programmers. And
we aren't just library people. We're actually programmers. We may have an episode title there.
And Ansel did want to.
I will mention. We did want to mention a change that has come recently in CopperSpice that we wanted to tell everybody about. We now offer a paid subscription policy for companies who are interested in supporting the development of CopperSpice and in turn getting priority support for their questions and feedback and things like that. We now offer a paid subscription. All the information about that is available on our website. And if you're interested in being a part of the project and or potentially guiding our direction, that's a great way to go about it.
So it's a tiered support. It's all there. We had a subscription policy, but we made it official and put it on the website. So
okay, that's terrific.
Yes.
I as I'm looking at your channel, I don't see I don't know if you can add other videos to your playlists. Because I was wondering if you had other conference videos that you've done, you could add those right to your playlist. I don't know if you can do that. Can you add other videos that aren't in your channel to your playlist? Yeah,
because we have done an undefined behavior talk on our YouTube channel, but it's like a 10 or 12 minute. Obviously, the ones at the conferences are an hour.
Or longer.
Or longer, yes, depending on how much we ramble. So there's actually 3 or 4 different videos that are out there on the internet, and we're open to giving the undefined behavior talk again, but we may have to retire that one and move on to other talks.
All right. Have you submitted to Aspen for this year?
I'm sorry. I think the audio cut out a little bit. We're not sure about that. We did a lot of conferences last year. We're still organizing 2020. I think that's what year it is now.
I think we're still recovering.
We're still recovering from last year, but we're open.
You're not alone in that, but we've got to put conferences on in 22. Yeah. So
we are still open to going to Aspen if that's an offer or anything. We will happily entertain that.
All right. Well, get your submissions in. All right. So we need to wish everyone safe coding, and I think one way of doing that is convincing people that they should be using libguarded. Whether it's CS libguarded or Boost libguarded, we can discuss that later. Anyway, so please join me in wishing everyone safe coding.
Safe coding.
Safe coding.